Winds of change blowing today.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. The earthquake that's happening in Israel now is beyond anyone's expectation, with confirmations today coming from the previous president of the Israeli Supreme Court that the tanks and power will be deciding what's happening in Israel after Benjamin Netanyahu refused the new orders of the Israeli Supreme Court. And we're going to talk all about this, the background and what's happening exactly, the potential outcomes coming out of all of this mess that's happening inside of Israel, with many people expecting full-on civil war after Benjamin Netanyahu's moves. So Benjamin Netanyahu, he has been trying to sack the Israeli head of the Shin Bet, Ronen Bar. Benjamin Netanyahu had multiple problems with various leaders in the security establishment. He managed to sack the previous IDF chief of staff, who eventually resigned, but it was Benjamin Netanyahu and his government pushing him out. And there were also reports from over half a year ago that he's trying to sack the head of the Israeli Shin Bet. The reason behind this is that these people were also showing positions that are opposing Benjamin Netanyahu, especially when it relates to the war. There were reports from the early days of the war that the leaders of the Israeli security establishment were interested in reaching an agreement with Hamas and with the Palestinian side so that they can get the Israeli prisoners of war back. However, Benjamin Netanyahu was keen on continuing for his own interests. The problem is now the Israeli Shin Bet or Shabak are actually publishing information relating to Benjamin Netanyahu insisting on continuing the war for his own interests, and that's why he wants to sack the current Israeli head of the Shin Bet and appoint someone who is tied with him, who's under his thumb, under his full control. In a historic move, the Israeli Supreme Court came after over 5 petitions went to the Israeli Supreme Court asking to overturn the decision made by the Israeli government to sack the head of the Shin Bet, and it was accepted. One of them was accepted, and the Israeli Supreme Court said that that's it. Everyone is calling it an earthquake in Israel. Those who pushed for this freezing were congratulating and greeting all of this move coming from the Israeli Supreme Court. However, others completely opposed it. As a matter of fact, recent stats in Israel are showing that the society is totally split between those who support the government's moves, those who support the Supreme Court. Slight majority they have, those who support the Supreme Court, and that's causing a lot of problems and a lot of division inside of Israel. The bigger problem came, though, after Benjamin Netanyahu outright refused to follow what the Supreme Court states, because the Supreme Court now, they said people have an option. Those who oppose the decision, they have an option to come in and hand what they want exactly. We will have a hearing and then we'll take it from there. But when the Supreme Court decides something in Israel, the government has to adhere. However, not this time. Benjamin Netanyahu said it's up to the government, and we will be deciding when the Israeli Shin Bet head will go off, and that's it, be out of his position. The Minister of Communication in Israel, Shlomo Karei, also had a statement in which he said, Honorable Justice Kanfi Steinitz, Ronen Bar will end his term on April the 10th or earlier with the appointment of a permanent Shin Bet head. You have no legal authority to interfere in this. This is the government's authority and the government's authority alone. Your order is invalid. The story is over. The people are the sovereign. Outright refusal from the Israeli government to comply with the Supreme Court. This is unprecedented in Israel's history. Usually every Israeli government, they used to adhere to the Supreme Court, and in many cases the Supreme Court ruled out with certain things that were against the Israeli government. But now Benjamin Netanyahu is outright opposing it. His government is outright opposing it, and this is leading to a full-blown crisis. Now the big question is, What exactly happens if the Israeli government refuses to adhere and follow the orders of the Israeli Supreme Court? Who does what exactly? Where does the enforcement come? This is what the previous president of the Supreme Court came and clarified. So Aharon Barak, his name is coming up with what was described in Israel as the nightmare scenario, a nightmare scenario during which a government does not adhere to the Israeli Supreme Court. And again, he's saying that this never happened in the history of the state of Israel. When he was asked what happens if the government refuses to abide by the courts, he said, in such a crisis, firstly, I haven't seen any case like this, but in such a case where the government is refusing to adhere to the government, firstly, this is considered a coup, a putsch, a revolution. And in that case, the Israeli army and the Israeli armed forces and the tanks will make the decision to end this coup. This is the first time that the previous head of the Israeli Supreme Court had to clarify this thing in such a blunt manner, that it would be a case of force being used against the Israeli government. And if force is being used against the Israeli government, that means outright bloody civil war inside of the state of Israel. Now, of course, he's trying to say later on that we don't want war. There shouldn't be a war. But this is the actual thing that needs to take place if the government refuses to adhere and follow the court's rulings, the Supreme Court. And he also mentioned that if the Jews, as he's saying, have this internal war, that would be something that Israel would not survive as a state. The state of Israel will not survive the wars of the Jews. So